Hello, my name is David Mano, and welcome to the personal correspondence of the Comte d'Artois. When you think of kings of France, who comes to mind? Probably Louis XIV, Sun King, builder of the Palace of Versailles. Also likely to spring to mind is Louis XVI, famous for the important role he played in the French Revolution. One king that not many seem to remember, however, is Louis's younger brother, Charles Philippe de Bourbon, Charles X of France, the Comte d'Artois. King of France for only 6 years before tendering his resignation, he's miles away from any list of memorable monarchs. In fact, he tends to be more well known for his role in the French Revolution too, long before he became king. So what brings us here to talk about him? The answer lies, or rather it lay, in an Ulster County basement. A collection of letters was found, manuscripts written in Artois' own hand. This collection contains 74 separate entries and spans from 1792 until 1804, albeit with some generous time skips. These letters were very generously lent by their owners, Roger Ross and Eric Bongartz, to SUNY New Paltz for perusal, and the goal of this project was to translate them into English for the first time. The specific span of these letters covers a very tumultuous time in the life of the Comte d'Artois. Artois is known for his role in leading the émigrés, royalist sympathizers and counter-revolutionaries who had fled France in an attempt to destabilize and overthrow the revolutionary government with outside support. Artois led the first real wave of émigrés, escaping France only 3 days after the storming of the Bastille. In order to truly understand how different this lifestyle was compared to what Artois was used to, we first have to give a bit of an overview as to what his life was like before the revolution, and why he was in no way prepared to be king. Let's take a brief look at the Bourbon family tree. After the death of Louis XV, Louis XVI becomes king. After a bit of trouble, he manages to sire some heirs to the throne, who will become king after him. If something somehow happens to both of them, the second eldest brother, the Comte de Provence, will become king, and after he dies, one of his children will become king. There is no reason to imagine that Artois will ever be the king. Because of this, Artois spends most of his life, well, lavishly. Hunting, partying, gambling, and drinking. He builds up a bit of a reputation. People begin insinuating that he's the real father of Louis XVI's children, going so far as to write plays about it. He's also very well known for being extremely devoted to tradition and the monarchy, to some extent even more than his brother, the monarch. Whenever Louis was to hesitate and consider making concessions to the people, Artois was the loudest voice of opposition. Artois was extremely fond of his lavish lifestyle and constantly taking loans from his brother. In 1777, for example, he bought 365 pairs of shoes so that he could wake up to a new pair every day. He always held extremely firmly to his idealization of the righteousness of royalty. For example, in May 1789, stating that the blood of my ancestors was passed to me in all its purity, that as long as I am bound to them by a drop in my veins, I will prove to the entire universe that I am worthy of being born a French nobleman. It's a combination of all these things that makes the present situation in which the letters find him all the more absurd. He's now in exile, traveling Europe to garner support for a royalist invasion of France. The first letter finds Artois in the Belgian city of Liège, explaining to his dear friend and fellow émigré, de Vaudreuil, about the situation. I'd have to have the pen of Jeremiah, my dear Vaudreuil, to illustrate the position we've been in since you've left. We've knocked on so many doors, places from which we had a right to expect to receive some funding. Yet, the defeat of the Austrians and their retreat towards the Meuse wound up managing to deplete our resources. The exiled prince finds himself in a situation of complete despair. Helpless to help himself, his family, or his friends, he quickly moves on to Dusseldorf, then to Ham, in late December of 1792. In the coming weeks, his brother is executed, leaving only his remaining son, Louis Charles, with the throne, except not because Louis Charles is imprisoned. Artois writes, "We shudderingly await the news from Paris. On the 26th, the king was supposed to have been judged once and for all. It is very difficult to maintain hope. However, some letters tell us of a simple banishment, but we don't dare flatter ourselves. Ah, my friend, what horror!" Following the death of his brother, Artois travels on in March to St. Petersburg in order to garner support from Catherine the Great. She not only eagerly supports him and his cause, but even gives him a custom sword inscribed with "For God and the King." This is incredibly poignant, as Artois later proves himself to be the most ardent supporter of the Catholic Church, and it was not uncommon at the time for swords to be inscribed with "For the King and the Nation." Charles, at the present moment, was for the king and against the nation. From St. Petersburg, Artois returns to Ham and remains there for a while, writing and waiting upon the news from Paris. It is during this stay that Marie Antoinette goes to the guillotine. This letter here is only to report the cruel instance of the Queen's murder. You know the wrongs that I could have blamed on this unfortunate woman, but in this moment I have forgotten everything, and my heart has suffered more than I am able to express to you. I had such love for her, and she was so kind to me. Through these letters, we are able to read the personal feelings of Artois and his thoughts on the late Marie Antoinette. It's intriguing how he claims that in his grief he's forgotten all of his qualms with her, and yet he still makes sure to mention that there are certainly wrongs he could have blamed on her. He remains in Ham for quite a long time, until after the death of Maximilien Robespierre. He remains in Ham for the entirety of the Reign of Terror, years 1 and 2, before going on the move and following the royal army across the Netherlands. He heads to Rotterdam, then to a camp near Nijmegen, and then to one near Arnhem, all the while updating Vaudreuil on the efforts he takes to try and get high-ranking positions in the royal army for members of Vaudreuil's family. He also describes the disastrous state of the war between the émigré army, the armies of Britain, the Netherlands, and the Holy Roman Empire against the struggling French Republic. Nijmegen has been taken over since yesterday, and I fear that we can't defend it, as this place is in no state to withstand a siege, and we can only be saved by an outside battle. Now for this, the English army is too weak, and the Austrians, pledged so long ago, have not arrived. He then heads to Deventer and writes about the British Army's retreat in Holland. Then to Osnabrück, where he gives an update on the conflict going on in Saint-Domingue, present-day Haiti. Have I not mentioned this conflict? Oh yes, there are multiple conflicts. Under the French Revolutionary government, all slavery in French colonies such as Saint-Domingue was abolished. Slave owners did not take kindly to this fact and found themselves in league with the Royalists. D'Artois writes to Vaudreuil in February of 1795. A good thing that I think I will tell you very quickly is that we've received affirmative news that Saint-Domingue is entirely subjugated to the English, and that the rebels are completely driven out. This is at least advantageous for some people, and principally for you. Vaudreuil was born on the island of Saint-Domingue, and thus had been concerned for the well-being of his slave-owning friends. After this, however, the letters stop until May of 1796, until Artois finds himself in Edinburgh, holed up in the Scottish palace of Holyrood House. This is frustrating, as the events at the time were momentous. The last remaining son of Louis XVI, young Louis Charles, passes away from tuberculosis at the age of 10, and the émigré princes declare Louis's younger brother, the Comte de Provence, now Louis XVIII, King of France. Unfortunately, the letters don't resume until Artois is up in Scotland, in a situation that an anonymous contemporary historian describes thusly. Once the most gay, gauding, fluttering, accomplished, luxurious, and expensive prince in Europe, Artois has at length found asylum in the palace of the Scottish kings. His reception, however, owing perhaps to the latitude of the place, is very cold. The ill-furnished and ill-lighted apartments at Edinburgh must recall, from the very contrast, the superbly decorated halls of Versailles. He is here with both his wife, Marie-Thérèse de Savoy, and his mistress, Louise de Polastron. Louise, who he refers continually throughout the set of letters as "my friend," is considered to be the true love of Artois' life. In April of 1794, he describes the pain of being separated from her while following the Royalist army. "I will make a great sacrifice in separating from my friend. As soon as the campaign began and I was not on horseback, this sacrifice became necessary, and we decided to make it, whatever it cost us." He refers to her continually in almost every letter, which is why it's all the more devastating when, in a letter from the 23rd of April, 1804, we read of his reaction to her death. "I feel more and more each day that the world has completely disappeared for me. It is so true, so profoundly true, that I only cared for one thing. Despite the cruel state of my heart and soul, my health is very good. I cannot conceive of it, and I fear that Providence only wishes to prolong my torture. Her death had such a profound impact upon him that he devoted himself entirely to the Catholic religion, which certainly played its role in his reign as king. He also took a vow of chastity for the rest of his remaining life. From here on, he sets off upon a journey, although it is quite vague about the details, only that he must go and must go alone. The collection of letters ends thusly on the 17th of July, 1804. Alas, my friend, it was 15 years ago today that we moved away from our country to avoid needless death. Life was dear to me then. Now I exist for nothing more than to ask God to cut short my agony and to pardon me the happiness that I enjoyed. And so the letters end. The First French Republic falls, the reign of Napoleon comes and goes, and Louis XVIII officially takes the throne. Louis XVIII has no children of his own, and so when he dies of both dry and wet gangrenes, astoundingly, the throne falls to Artois, king through a series of unfortunate events. After the death of Polestron, Artois fully devotes himself to his religion and thus attempts to give vast power to the church. He reinstates the practice of the royal touch, wherein the king touches you, and you are miraculously healed of the king's disease. After witnessing the failures and irresolution of his eldest brother, and what that led to, Charles X attempts to quash any attempts at rebellion. You know this famous painting by Eugene Delacroix, Liberty Leading the People, which is often mistakenly assumed to be about the French Revolution? It's actually inspired by the July Rebellion of 1830, which took place in Charles's reign and was the reason he had to abdicate the throne. He is massively unpopular, and after a 6-year reign, the exiled prince becomes the exiled king. He later dies of cholera, in exile, and is today the only French king buried outside of France. What we can read in these letters is a fascinating glimpse into a very remarkable time in his life, as well as an outsider's view of the events of the French Revolution. The man known for nothing but lavish partying and extraordinary spending habits is now found trying to organize an entire counter-revolution. They show the complexities and intimacies of an extremely difficult individual to sympathize with, and the process of translating them opened up, for me personally, new windows into interpreting history.